Ethan Cole stepped off the transport shuttle onto the bustling orbital station with a deep breath. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the low hum of machinery mingled with voices in countless alien languages. He had been assigned to this station as a junior technician, repairing environmental controls and helping maintain life support systems. It was his first long-term assignment away from Earth, and he was trying to keep a low profile. Humans were still new here, and many species looked at them with either curiosity or suspicion. Ethan preferred quiet observation. He liked his work and preferred it that way, believing the less attention he drew, the safer he would be. Housing on the station was limited. After a diplomatic incident disrupted several residential areas, the administration was pairing residents from different species together. Ethan had been warned that roommates could be unpredictable. He expected another human, or at least a calm alien, someone whose habits would align with his own. He wasn't prepared for what walked through the door the moment he arrived at his new quarters. The room was modest, a single bed, a small desk, and a view of the station's central hub through a transparent wall. As he stepped inside, dragging his small bag, a tall figure entered behind him. Ethan froze. The alien was taller than any human he had ever seen, with elongated limbs and a graceful but imposing stance. Her skin shimmered faintly in the light, a deep iridescent blue that seemed to shift with every movement. Her eyes were bright gold, sharp and calculating, and her presence alone made Ethan feel both nervous and curious. She scanned the room, moving with a quiet confidence, and her gaze landed on him. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The room seemed to shrink around them, the hum of machinery fading into silence. Then she lifted a long, slender arm, extended a finger, and pointed directly at him. She said a single word in a clear, commanding tone. "Mine," the word echoed in Ethan's mind. "Mine," he thought. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Around the station, in the alien cultures, that word had heavy meaning. It was not casual. It could signify a bond, a claim, or even a challenge. Ethan's mind raced. Had she just claimed him? Other residents passing by the open corridor paused and stared. Whispers spread quickly. Some aliens recoiled, some tilted their heads with curiosity. Rumors traveled faster than sound in a station filled with dozens of species. Ethan realized immediately that his life had just become anything but ordinary. I'm Ethan," he said, his voice small, unsure if it would carry the weight he intended. "I don't understand." Kyra, as she later introduced herself in a calm, measured voice, didn't smile. She studied him carefully, tilting her head slightly. "I know," she said simply. "You will understand soon." Ethan swallowed hard. The alien was not threatening in a violent way, but the quiet confidence, the stillness, and the gaze that seemed to pierce through him made it impossible to feel comfortable. He wanted to step back, to retreat to his corner of the room, but he also felt a strange pull, a curiosity he couldn't explain. Over the next hours, Ethan tried to observe Kyra's behavior. She moved gracefully, her motions precise and deliberate. Every step seemed purposeful. She unpacked her belongings with efficiency and didn't speak unless necessary. But when she did, her voice carried weight. Even the station's loud, bustling corridors seemed to quiet slightly in her presence. Ethan tried to ask questions about her species, about the words she had said. Every answer was measured and cryptic. "Mine does not mean what you think," she explained once, her golden eyes studying him closely. "It means you are important, that I am responsible for you. That others must respect your place here." Ethan nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. Responsibility, respect. He had come to the station expecting routine work, not being chosen for some unknown role by a powerful alien. The first few days were difficult. Other residents treated him differently. Some gave him cautious nods as though acknowledging his new status. Others avoided him entirely, wary of what Kyra's choice implied. Ethan walked carefully through the station, every step measured. He had never imagined that living on a station could feel like navigating a political battlefield. Kyra, meanwhile, maintained a strict routine. She trained daily, her movements fluid and precise, her focus absolute. Ethan watched from the doorway, trying to understand what it meant. She seemed to respect him in a way no other alien had ever done with a human. She didn't belittle him. She didn't ignore him. But she made it clear that he had to meet her standards, that she expected him to observe, to learn, to adapt. One evening, as the station's artificial sun dimmed for a simulated night cycle, Ethan noticed a small holographic display glowing in Kyra's room. He couldn't resist looking closer. The images showed battles, distant star systems, and humans fighting against overwhelming odds. Ethan recognized the humans. They were survivors, engineers, and soldiers, but the odds they faced were staggering. The aliens surrounding them often underestimated them, yet the humans adapted, overcame, and survived. Kyra noticed him watching and didn't speak at first. Then she said softly, "That is why I chose you." Ethan's head spun. Chose him. Out of all the humans, out of all the possible roommates. Why? You survive, she explained. Not because of strength, not because of weapons, but because you think, you adapt, you do not give up. Humans have potential others ignore. I need to see it realized. The words sank into Ethan slowly. He had never thought of himself as remarkable, quiet, careful, ordinary, that had been his identity. But Kyra's attention, her choice, forced him to see a possibility he hadn't imagined. The next challenge came in an unexpected way. Other aliens began testing him, not physically at first, but through observation and subtle social pressures. They assumed he could not hold up, that Kyra's choice was a mistake. Ethan was forced to respond, not with violence, but with intelligence. He navigated social traps, diffused misunderstandings, and showed his quick thinking. Slowly, the perception of him shifted. He was no longer just a human among aliens. He was someone who commanded respect in ways few had expected. Through it all, Kyra remained distant but supportive. She corrected mistakes, pointed out weaknesses, and observed silently when Ethan succeeded. Her presence was both comforting and intimidating, a constant reminder that his actions mattered far more than he had realized. One night, as the station rotated to simulate a quiet evening, Ethan finally spoke openly. "Why me?" he asked. Kyra looked at him, her golden eyes reflecting the soft station lights. "Because you are human, because your species can do what others cannot. I have seen you survive situations that stronger species failed. You adapt, you endure, that is what matters, that is what makes you mine." Ethan didn't understand fully, but a spark ignited inside him. This was not about possession. This was not about dominance. This was a challenge, a responsibility, and an opportunity. He had been thrust into a galaxy where humans were underestimated, where other species assumed superiority, and now he had a chance to prove them wrong. The part ended with Ethan looking out at the massive hub of the station, hundreds of alien ships moving in perfect coordination, humans scattered among them, mostly ignored. But he was no longer just one of the overlooked humans. He had been chosen, claimed in a way that meant he had potential beyond what he had ever imagined. And the first step of his journey had begun. Ethan woke to the low hum of the station and the soft glow of artificial morning light spilling through the wide windows. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of Kyra moving. She was already training, her body a blur of precise, practiced motions. She didn't speak, but Ethan could feel her eyes on him as he stirred. He had long stopped trying to sneak a peek at her routines. It was impossible. Kyra noticed everything, from the smallest gesture to the subtlest misstep. He swung his legs over the bed and stretched, his muscles stiff from sleeping on the thin mattress. Living with Kyra had been an adjustment. At first he had tried to keep to himself, thinking that silence was safe, but silence was not safe around her. Kyra expected attention, focus, and awareness. Even when she didn't speak, Ethan felt the weight of her presence. It was as if she measured him constantly, noting every reaction, every expression, every tiny mistake. Breakfast was silent. Ethan had learned not to ask questions too early in the day. Kyra had a strict routine, and mornings were for preparation, training, and observation. She moved with an effortless grace, fluid and precise, her movements a combination of strength and speed that Ethan could barely comprehend. Watching her made him aware of how little he truly understood about other species. Their bodies were different, their senses sharper, and their ways of thinking shaped by lifetimes he could never imagine. Despite the differences, Kyra had begun to teach him small lessons, not about combat, at least not yet, but about observation. She pointed out patterns in the station's daily flow, showing him how to anticipate maintenance schedules, how to notice anomalies, and how to understand the subtle interactions of the aliens around them. Ethan realized that her word "mine" was not a claim of ownership in the way humans thought about property. It was a responsibility. She had chosen him because she believed he could learn, adapt, and survive. One day, while Ethan was repairing a malfunctioning panel in the station's corridor, a small group of aliens approached him. They were tall, heavily muscled, and wore expressions that screamed judgment. Ethan froze, instinctively aware of their expectation that he would be weak, easy to intimidate. Kyra's warning from the previous evening echoed in his mind. Do not underestimate the challenge. Strength is not only physical. Instead of responding with fear, Ethan studied the group. He noticed their gait, the way they shifted weight, the small gestures that betrayed impatience. Using what he had learned from Kyra, he moved calmly, spoke clearly, and diffused the tension with words rather than force. The aliens glanced at each other, surprised, before muttering something and walking away. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing for the first time that his mind could be just as powerful a weapon as their strength. Kyra watched from a distance, her golden eyes reflecting a faint glimmer of approval. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Ethan understood her silent praise better than any words. This was the first time he had felt a measure of control, a hint of equality, in the galaxy that had always seemed so overwhelmingly vast. Life with Kyra continued to challenge him. Their cultural differences created both tension and humor. Once when Ethan tried to cook a simple meal, Kyra watched silently, her expression unreadable. He misjudged a seasoning, and she raised an eyebrow, tilted her head, and said one word in her language. Ethan had no idea what it meant, but he felt the sting of critique. He had learned quickly that mistakes were noticed, and not all lessons came with kindness. Yet, with every correction, he learned. Kyra also introduced him to small exercises in strategy and logic. She would simulate scenarios where he had to choose paths, manage resources, or resolve conflicts between hypothetical species. It was exhausting, mentally and physically, but Ethan discovered a resilience he hadn't known existed. He began to notice patterns, anticipate outcomes, and make decisions that impressed even Kyra. Other aliens began to notice the changes as well. Rumors spread across the station that Ethan was no ordinary human. Some watched him with suspicion, believing that if Kyra had chosen him, there must be more to him than met the eye. Others were curious, observing from afar, trying to understand why the tall warrior alien had selected a human instead of one of their own. One afternoon, Kyra received a visitor. A member of her species, older and commanding, entered the room without hesitation. Ethan could feel the tension immediately. This was not a casual visit. Kyra straightened, her body rigid with focus, and the older alien studied Ethan carefully. Ethan felt his pulse spike. He had been tested by strangers before, but never with this intensity. The elder spoke in a sharp, clipped tone, and Kyra responded with equal firmness. The words were in their language, but Ethan could sense the meaning in the gestures, the pauses, the glances. Kyra's hand moved briefly to his shoulder, a subtle but clear signal of reassurance. He was part of this now, whether he wanted it or not. The elder left after a tense exchange, leaving Ethan shaken but oddly proud. He realized that his presence had altered the dynamics of Kyra's world. His mind, his choices, his humanity had weight. As the weeks passed, Ethan became more confident. He navigated the station's corridors with purpose, handled minor conflicts, and began to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Kyra allowed him more independence, observing silently but stepping in only when necessary. Their bond grew stronger, rooted in mutual respect rather than fear or dominance. Ethan began to understand that mine was not a claim of possession but a recognition of potential, a trust that he could rise to the challenges ahead. One evening, the station was shaken by an emergency alarm. A minor hull breach had been detected near the docking bay, and multiple species scrambled to respond. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He coordinated with engineers, relaying instructions clearly and efficiently. He directed traffic, ensured safety protocols, and worked alongside Kyra without hesitation. Other humans had panicked, but Ethan remained calm, his mind sharp, his actions precise. Kyra noticed. She moved beside him, her presence a silent acknowledgement of his skill. Together, they stabilized the situation, preventing what could have been a disastrous accident. The other species who witnessed the event murmured in surprise. Humans were often underestimated, but here was one who could manage chaos, think critically under pressure, and work alongside the galaxy's strongest. After the incident, as the artificial sun dimmed, Ethan and Kyra returned to their room. Silence hung between them, comfortable and meaningful. Kyra finally spoke. "You are learning faster than I expected," she said. Her tone was neutral, but Ethan sensed the approval beneath it. I'm trying," Ethan replied. "I don't want to fail, I don't want to disappoint you." Kyra tilted her head. "Disappointment is not the goal, understanding is, growth is. You will be challenged constantly, others will doubt you. But that is the path. You must prove not only to them but to yourself what humans are capable of." Ethan felt a warmth of determination. For the first time, he understood that his presence mattered. Not because he was physically strong, not because he was trained in combat, but because of his ability to adapt, to think, to survive where others failed. Humanity's strength was underestimated, and now he was part of demonstrating it. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A rival faction of aliens, curious and wary of Kyra's choice, confronted Ethan in the station's central hub. They assumed he would back down, that his human limitations would make him vulnerable. Instead, Ethan engaged with their leader calmly, using logic and strategy rather than force. He diffused tension, redirected blame, and negotiated a compromise that satisfied all parties. The rivals left muttering, impressed despite themselves. Kyra watched from a distance, her golden eyes reflecting a rare flicker of pride. Ethan realized that he was no longer just surviving. He was influencing, shaping, and commanding respect in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the part, Ethan understood the truth of his situation. He was no ordinary human. He was chosen, tested, and challenged in ways few species had imagined. Kyra's word, "mine," had marked the beginning of a journey where humans would prove their worth not through brute strength, but through intelligence, adaptability, and courage. The galaxy was watching, and Ethan was ready to rise. The station's alarms blared, echoing through corridors and chambers, waking Ethan with a jolt. The red emergency lights cast sharp shadows, reflecting off the metallic walls and the distant windows that showed a galaxy alive with motion. Kyra was already at the door, her movements swift and precise, as if she had anticipated the moment before it even arrived. Ethan scrambled to follow, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. This was the first real test of everything he had learned. A hostile faction had infiltrated the station, targeting Kyra because of her controversial decision to bond with a human. Their ships had docked unexpectedly, and their soldiers had begun moving through the lower levels. Panic spread quickly, and Ethan could hear the terrified voices of other species around him, but he could not panic. He had learned from Kyra that fear was a weapon only if it controlled you. Kyra led him through a series of narrow passageways, her movements graceful and confident. Ethan followed, aware of every sound, every shift of weight. They reached a junction where several other aliens had gathered, some ready to fight, others frozen in uncertainty. Ethan quickly assessed the situation. He knew that brute force alone would not succeed against this faction. The attackers were trained, organized, and expecting resistance. They underestimated humans. That was their first mistake. Ethan took a deep breath and began issuing instructions, calmly but firmly. "You secure the passage to the docking bay. You evacuate civilians to the upper levels. I'll manage the corridor and coordinate with Kyra." His words were clear, concise, and carried authority. The aliens glanced at him, surprised. A human giving orders in such a precise and confident manner was unexpected. Kyra watched silently, her golden eyes observing every choice he made. She had taught him to read the environment, to anticipate threats, and to act decisively. Ethan felt a surge of determination. Humans were underestimated not because of weakness, but because of potential. He was about to demonstrate that potential. The attackers arrived, and the corridor erupted into controlled chaos. Ethan guided the defensive efforts, using the narrow spaces to neutralize threats without unnecessary violence. He created diversions, sealed doors, and rerouted power to block access, all while coordinating with Kyra, who moved with lethal efficiency beside him. Her strikes were precise, but Ethan noticed she rarely attacked when unnecessary. Instead, she allowed him to strategize, to lead the efforts, knowing that the human mind had a unique way of solving problems. A sudden breach occurred on the upper level, where civilians were evacuating. Ethan noticed the gap in security and immediately redirected a small team to contain the threat. He moved with speed, adjusting plans on the fly, predicting enemy movements. Kyra followed, covering his rear, her presence a constant reassurance. The attackers expected fear, but they found coordination, ingenuity, and unanticipated resistance. At one point, an enemy soldier cornered Ethan in a dimly lit section of the station. He had no weapons of his own, only his wits. The alien advanced, assuming that strength would intimidate him. Ethan acted quickly, using a maintenance panel to release a pressurized stream of gas, momentarily disorienting the attacker. In that instant, he used his knowledge of the station's layout to maneuver behind the alien, blocking its path until Kyra arrived. She dispatched the threat with a single, controlled strike. As the battle continued, Ethan realized that human strength lay not in raw power, but in adaptability and problem-solving. Every corridor, every system, every mechanical quirk of the station could be used strategically. He coordinated defenses, repaired critical systems mid-battle, and kept morale high among the other species who were starting to see humans in a new light. Kyra's respect for him grew visibly. She no longer simply observed, she relied on him. Their synergy became apparent. Where she had strength and combat skill, he provided strategy, foresight, and quick thinking. Together, they created a balance that no attacker could anticipate. They were not just a team, they were a force that challenged expectations. After hours of tense engagement, the hostile faction retreated. Ethan and Kyra had managed to protect civilians, secure the station, and neutralize the immediate threat. The aftermath left a stunned station behind. Aliens whispered among themselves, eyes lingering on Ethan with newfound recognition. Humans had survived chaos where stronger, older species had been expected to dominate, and they had done so without resorting to recklessness. Kyra stood beside him, silent but proud. Ethan finally understood the full meaning of her word, mine. It was not ownership. It was trust, responsibility, and recognition. She had claimed him not to possess him, but to mark him as capable, to acknowledge the unique strength of humanity. The station administration convened an emergency council to discuss the attack and its implications. Representatives from multiple species gathered, their faces grave. Ethan and Kyra entered, their presence commanding attention. Whispers filled the chamber. How could a human coordinate defenses so efficiently? How had they turned the tide without causing mass casualties? The council listened as Ethan calmly explained his decisions, his observations, and the logic behind his actions. He spoke plainly, without arrogance, and the aliens could not deny the effectiveness of his strategies. Kyra added details where necessary, but she let him take the lead, knowing that his demonstration was as much about proving humanity's potential as it was about recounting the event. By the end of the session, the council's opinion of humans had shifted. Skepticism turned to cautious respect. Humans were no longer seen as weak, unpredictable, or inconsequential. They were capable, adaptable, and resilient. Ethan had become a symbol of that strength, not because he had the power of Kyra's species, but because he had what others often overlooked: intellect, adaptability, and courage under pressure. As the council adjourned, Kyra and Ethan returned to their quarters. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of understanding. Ethan realized that the bond between them had evolved. It was no longer about dominance or control. It was about partnership, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Kyra's mine had transformed into a promise, a commitment to face challenges together, and a recognition of humanity's worth in a galaxy that often underestimated them. Ethan sat at the window, watching the stars glide past the station's exterior. Kyra joined him, silent, her presence warm despite the alien distance of her form. They didn't speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. The station below hummed with life, other species resuming their routines, now with a subtle awareness that humans could not be ignored. Finally, Kyra broke the silence. "You have learned quickly," she said. "Humans are more than I expected. They survive, adapt, and endure where others falter. That is why you were chosen. That is why you are mine." Ethan smiled faintly, understanding. I never thought I could make a difference, but now I see that humans have more to offer than I realized, and I won't waste the chance." Kyra inclined her head. "Good, we will face the galaxy together. Challenges will come, you will continue to be tested. But now others will begin to see what I have always known. Humans are stronger than they appear." The stars outside the window seemed to shimmer brighter, as if echoing her words. Ethan felt a surge of determination, a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, full of danger, politics, and unseen threats. But humanity had begun to claim its place among the stars, not through force alone, but through ingenuity, resilience, and courage. Kyra turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. The galaxy underestimates humans. Let them continue. We will show them otherwise. Ethan nodded. Together. In that moment, amid the hum of the station and the glow of distant stars, Ethan realized that being chosen was not about possession. It was about responsibility, opportunity, and proving the worth of an entire species. Humanity's story was only beginning, and he would face it with courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. And as the orbital station rotated through the void, carrying a human and an alien warrior who had learned to trust one another, the galaxy quietly began to take notice. Humanity had survived its first true test in this corner of space, and it would not be ignored again.